Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to the cash flow statement. In this week, I'm going to show you how to create your own cash flow statement for any type of year, complete with previous period, monthly detail, print, and email report. It's going to be an incredible training. I cannot wait. So let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining me this week. I really appreciate it. Cash flow statement, a very important and highly requested training, so I'm happy to bring these to you. In fact, I bring these trainings to you each and every Tuesday absolutely free. Even this workbook is free. All you need to do is click the links down below, either with your email or messenger, and I'll include that in the detail area, and we'll get that workbook sent over right to you. If you like these accounting type applications and you want to learn how to create your own Excel workbooks for resale value, you want to create that recurring income stream, I help you do that inside my mentorship course, a 132-hour course, an incredible masterclass where I go over every step of how to define, design, develop, and deploy your own Excel applications for passive income. So you hope you'll join us for that. Let's get started on this training, a super simple one this week. In fact, just a little bit of VBA code. It's going to be great for those beginners. And also we're going to go over how to create this cash flow statement and why it is important. Please don't forget, of course, to subscribe. Make sure you click on the notification icon bell and smash that like button. That helps keep these trainings up front and always available to you each and every day. So what is a cash flow statement? Well, let's go over a little bit of a summary I have here. A cash flow statement is really important for a business. It's also known as the statement of cash flows. It actually shows how much cash is generated and used during a given period of time. If you're running the business, even if you're making a profit, you've got to know what amount of cash is coming in. It's one of the main financial statements analysts use to build in a three-statement model, right? So we're using operating activities, investing activities, and financing activities. Those are all very, very important. And the operating activities, they're like the principal revenue generating activities of an organization. And these are, other than like not investing or financing, it's basically any cash flows from your operations, whether you're buying and selling goods or you're buying and selling services or you're offering services. That's the main activities. Investing activities, the second one. Now, those are any cash flows from acquisition and disposal of long-term assets. If you're selling, like you're selling machinery that you're not using anymore, or you're investing in type of machinery, that's where it would go. Those are not part of your normal operating activities. And then, of course, you have financing activities. Those are any cash flows that result in change of size or the composition of a contributed equity. And what does that mean? That means if you're borrowing money or you're financing other people, right? It's the cash that goes in and out when you're doing that for businesses. So those are really important, and it comes in different details. So when we look at our cash flow statement, we've got a cash from receipts, right? So these are our operations. So we have our cash coming into the operations, and we have it based on the year. So the customer payments, 104,000 in customer payments. We have other income from our operations. And then we have also in our operations, those are the main things. What inventory did we purchase, in order for us to sell? Or maybe administrative expenses that you needed to pay, your labor in your office age, or your wages. Maybe you paid interest on that, or your income taxes paid. Those are all part of the operations. Very important. And then, so what that will do is you'll determine the net cash flow from those operations. And then we have it on a per year basis, of course, or we can hide the previous period. And then also we have investing activities. Investing, very important. Property or equipment sales. If you've sold any property or equipment, you'd want to put that into that category. Loan calculations, right? Loan collection, excuse me. If you've collected on a loan, like you've loaned out money to another business or another person, and you've collected on that, that's income, that's cash coming in to you. So we need to record that. And then security sales, if you're selling the securities or something and that cash came in for that. So here's where the cash came in. And of course, cash going out, right? If you're also purchasing any property or purchasing any equipment, that would be cash out. Loan payments, right? If you're making payments on a loan, that would be cash out. Also, securities and purchases. If you're making purchases of different securities, that would also be cash out. And lastly, the third category is the financing category. Also very important. So if you issue a stock and you get money from that, that would be an income. Or if you're borrowing money from another entity, that would be cash coming in as well. Also, if you repurchase stock, if you pay for that and you're purchasing stock, that'd be cash out because you're actually making that purchase. If you're repaying loans, you have a loan out and you have to pay it back, that would also be cash out. Or if you're paying dividends to your stockholders, that also would be cash out. So that all combines for our financing activities, right? We get the net increase in cash, $2,500 for the year. So basically this is simply all of our operations along with our net cash flow, along with our net cash. Notice these are negative in this case, and we still have a net increase in cash of $2,510. And that was for the year of 2021 and for year 2020 if we want to show that. If we want to show a monthly detail to break those items down into every month for the given year. Now, where does all this data come from? It comes all from transaction data. So if we scroll over here, we can see a lot of transactions, right? So it's all based on transactions. Transaction ID, a date, the type of it, the name, the account, and whether it was a deposit or withdrawal. So our idea is to take all this data in and bring it into a cash flow statement. So this is very similar to what you might find in some sort of a transaction database. So it's very similar to that, and you'll generally have an account and you'll have a type and something like that. So keep that in mind. You could also have an account and then a related type, depending upon how you set it up, but it's generally something like this. Okay, so what our job is to do is to take this data and bring it into something called the cash flow statement. Now, what we have here is a staging area. And oftentimes what I really like to do is create this staging area. So I don't always necessarily, here's my main report. I don't necessarily really want to have my data in here because when we have our main report data, we can have different reports. So if I delete all that and just double click on here to refresh it, it's all going to come back. And that's really nice. Why do we want to do that? Well, several reasons. One, we don't want formulas at risk in front of the user. That's certainly a reason. So there's no formulas at risk here. Two, we may want to use this area for different reports. If you've taken any of my dashboard courses or seen dashboards, you can have a menu of reports here. So you click on cash flow, profit and loss, and things like that. And those particular reports can appear right here. So we have our main report area. We can show several different reports in the same area if we use this area here. That way we have somewhere else where we're creating and it's simply bringing over that information into this area. So that's another reason. And another reason you may want to have is you may want to show or hide certain issues. Maybe you want to use VBA to go through the rows and only show certain rows or only show certain. It allows us to use a filter. So maybe we don't want to show investing activities. We could do that as well without having to hide or show rows. So there's lots of options of why you want to do that. So we don't have any formulas here. These are just values. And as you see, we can just delete that. So what do we have? We do have our formulas in here. So this is called our staging area. And if you were, let's minimize that. You see here, we have our data here. Now, if you were going to create additional reports, all you would need to do is create additional staging areas over here. So you could create a profit and loss here. You could create additional reports here, maybe a balance sheet here, or net worth or anything like that, graphs, and then just bring them over into the main area. So there's a great advantage to having this staging area for your reports. And so that's just what we did here. So we've got a few named ranges, not very much. So let's go over some of the named ranges for our data. We have this one here, it's called CF year. I'm calling it cash flow year, CF year, and that's the year. We have a number of years. So basically we have the cash flow years. This is part of the drop-down list. And I'm just calling that years. Inside our main data here in our transaction data, we have a few ones. And let's just go over some of the named ranges that I've created here. So if we take a look inside our name manager here, we've got transaction date here. We're using offset formula. So that means that no matter how long the data is, it's all going to be encapsulated inside that. So it's going to go all the way down to the bottom of our data. In this case, row 362. Those are the dates of the transactions. As we add transactions, that named range will grow. And the reason we want to create a named range for our transaction date is because our summaries, our totals will be based on months or based on years. So we certainly need to track that date. We also have the transaction deposits, and this is also using offset, a dynamic named range for all the deposits. And we have another one called transaction type here. Those are all based on the transaction type. That's very important because we're totaling it based on specific types. And lastly, we have transaction withdrawal, so all the withdrawals there. So those are really the four main named range based on our transaction database. And then what we have here is we have our transaction here. So we've got our header row here. And all we need to do for our header row is use a formula. Because we know we've got the CF year based in a named range, right? Directly based from whatever's located in E3, we can use that inside formulas. And so to do that, basically all we're going to do is just type in equals, and then for the year ended December 31st, every year is going to end on the same date, and then put a space and then the year. And so that's going to always show. So no matter what year is there, our statement of cash flow subtitle will take care of that year. So it's going to be very simple. And also what we have is we have the year, the current year, which is the CF year. And then we have the previous year, which is the CF year minus 1. Then, of course, we just have simple January, March, April, May. We just have all the months. So all this data, and then I've just got a total here to make sure that our totals are accurate, right? We have the totals that are current year, just to making sure there's a different way we're basically summing up all of our totals. And we'll go into these formulas right now so we can understand exactly how we're arranging them. So that's how we get our header titles. So now we have cash on receipts. This is just a fixed name. And then basically I just put everything in as a fix because it's always going to be the same. So we don't need to make these variable as we do sometimes in VBA, although you could. But so what we have is customer payments. So what I want to do in this particular formula is basically I want to know all the customer payments, all of the deposits minus any withdrawals for customer payments for the given year, which is 2021. So how do we do that? We're going to use the sum ifs. And what are we summing? We're summing, again, all of the transaction deposits, and we're going to base it on a specific date. We know that it has to be, there's the criteria range, is that transaction date, why it was so important. We're going to use greater than equal, and I basically need to know the first of the year, greater than equal the first of the year. So we can use our date function here, and we're going to be based on that year. Here's that year again, that year, and then January is the month, and then January 1st as the first of the day. So that's all we have. We need to make sure that the transaction date is greater than the 1st of January of that year. We also need to make sure that it is less than or equal the last day of the year. So again, we're going to put in another range and criteria range, and then the criteria for that range is going to be less than or equal. Again, we're using the date function one more time, and we're going to use the year, the same year, but this time we're going to use the month of December 12 and the last day. So we know it must be less than or equal that date. Also, we need one more. We need to make sure that the account type is the same as customer payments. So we're going to do the account type is equal to whatever is in K6. And notice the absolute is in front of the K, meaning we want it fixed on that specific column, but not fixed to any specific row. So that when we drag this to the right, as in the months, or we drag this down for additional our types, our transaction types, the function will allow us to drag it down and maintain the formula integrity. Okay, so we want to do all of that. I want to basically add up all the deposits. Now, in case there's any subtractions, there could be some returns or something, there could be some withdrawals. So we want to also subtract out any withdrawals. And to do that, we're going to do the same exact thing, except this time, all we're going to do is sum the withdrawals, right? Everything else is the same. The transaction date is greater than equal the first of the year. Transaction date must also be less than or equal the last day of the year, and the transaction type has to be K6. That is going to get us our total. So when I drag that down or copy the formulas down to this, it's automatically going to add up. Negative values are going to be showing in the red in parentheses. And why is that? Well, that's based on our currency. So when we go into the number formats, I've chosen this one right here, this currency right here. I want it in red and I want it in parentheses, right? If I were to choose a different one, it would show. So that's based on the number format that I have selected here, because that's how I want it to show. And so we're going to do that for each one of these. Now we also want to know the net cash flow. So this is simply all we need to do. The net cash flow from operations is simply the sum of all of that. Relatively easy. And we've done the same thing here. We're basically using the same exact formula and the same formula here. Now for the year previous, all we need to do is just make a few slight additions, right, or differentiations on that. This time it's going to be basically, again, we're looking at the transaction, We're looking at the dates, but this time the date is greater than or equal to year minus 1. So each instance of the year, we're going to subtract 1 here. So here minus 1, and then we're also going to subtract all the withdrawals. Also, again, the date is greater than here, the year minus 1 here, and the year minus 1. So basically, all we're doing is using the same exact formula except using the year before, and that's going to get us our values. Now what we want to do is I want to know the month. Now this is the month of the given year, 21, not the previous year. All these totals are based on the current year, 2021. So what I want to do is I want to sum up, in this case, only those dates for this customer payment that landed in the month of January. Now, how do I get that month of January? I know that January is the first month, right? But what I don't want to do is I don't want to choose, we have our dates. I don't want to choose month 1, month 2, month 3, right? I want a single formula that I can just copy all over the place. So how do I do that? Well, if the only differentiation here is months, and I know January is 1, February is 2, and so on and so forth, when I use this date function, what am I going to do? I'm going to base it on this. If I know this is 1, let's take a look. What column is this? What column am I on? If this is 16, and this is column 17, and I need to extract 1 from here, and I need to extract 2 from here, the best way to do that is simply to subtract 15. And so that's just what I've done inside the formula. What that will do is make that dynamic month based on the column. That way this is automatically 2, this is automatically 3 when I subtract 15 from the current column. And that's just what we did here. So we're making pretty much the same one, but this time our date, so we're still totaling our deposits. Our date has to be greater than, it's going to be based on the current year. And then the month, what is that month number? The month is basically whatever the current column is minus 15. So in January's case, it's going to be 16 minus 15. So that's going to be the month 1. So all we have to do there. Then what I want to do is I need to know the last day of the month. So we're going to use less than or equal the last day of the month. And to get the last day of the month, we can use the EO month function. What that's going to do is get us the last day of the month, and we want the current month, right? That month. So again, we're going to use exactly the same date, the column minus 16 minus 15 get us 1, but this time we're going to say 0 months ahead or 0 months back, so we want that current month. That is going to get us, this formula here is going to get us the last day of the month. So I need to make sure that that transaction is less than or equal to the last day of the month. Then the transaction type is also going to be case 6. We're going to do the exact same thing. We're subtracting out any withdrawals. So doing that right here, and all we need to do again, same thing here, first day of the month here, using January here in this first case, minus again using EO month, also again there. So as we move forward, so every time we subtract, in June it's going to be right 6, 7 for July. So that way our formula is very, very easy. All I need to do is just copy this formula here and then just forward it or drag it over. Either way, it's going to work just fine, just like that. And then all I need to do is just bring it down, or I can copy it here and bring it down. It's the same formula, just to copy it down. So if I want to do it very, very simple, I can do it through all those because I'm using those months. So that's how we have to do it. Very, very simple to do that. All right, so let's go into detail. So we understand how we're getting the sum. And then all I've done is just simply summed up all these and just drag it over here. Simply the sum of whatever's here. So in other words, slightly different. For the months, I'm going to sum it in the single column. However, for the entire year, we're going to put the sum in the adjacent column just to give it a different look. All right, this is simply the total of all the months. I want to make sure that the total of all the months here, just to double check, is equal to the sum here. I want to make sure that those values are exactly the same, and they are in this case. Just to make sure, double check our work. So they are. That's always a good way to check. So we've done exactly the same formula throughout. It's a relatively simple, it's a kind of a big formula, but it's a relatively simple. We're simply summing all of the deposits minus the withdrawals. And if it's more withdrawals than deposits, it's going to be a negative number like it is in these cases. Okay, great. So once I have all of the data in here and I've got everything just the way I want it, what I want to do is I want to then bring all of that data, all the values and the formats, I want to bring them over. The formats are already there into our summary page. So we can do that with a single line of code. And when do we want that to happen? Well, we want that to happen anytime the user makes a change to this, right? So if they select a different year, I want to make that change. It's very fast. So you notice it's very fast. So how do we do that? Well, it's just a single line of code. And this is going to be based on the change event. When the user makes a change to E3, we want something to happen. And that's going to come inside VBA. It's going to do that for us. So to get into VBA, you can use the shortcut keys Alt F11, or you can use your Developers tab here and click on the Visual Basic. And if you don't have this Developers tab, you can just get it. I'm using Excel 2010, an older version, but it works just fine. And so if you want to get that Developers tab visible, all we need to do is just go into the Customize ribbon in the options and make sure that you have the Developers option selected here. So once we do get into VBA, it's going to be based on the change event. So we're focused on this cash flow sheet right here. This is the sheet I'm focusing on, right? Cash flow is the one we're making. And we're going to focus on the worksheet here, and we're going to focus on the change event, when a user makes a change. Now, if the user makes a change to more than one cell, I want to exit the sub. And we can do that with target, count large. If it's greater than one, exit sub. Exit, right, on change, exit on change of more than one cell at a time. So we don't, if the user makes a change to E3, only E3, if not intersect, right? If the user made a change, target means the cell that they've changed, and E3 is the same, means they've made a change to E3, and is nothing, meaning nothing and not cancel each other out. That means they have made a change to E3. And another condition, we also want to make sure that E3 is not empty. It can't be empty. It has to contain a year. If both of those conditions are true, then what do we want to do? We want to run a macro called cash flow refresh. If you want to get to that macro, all you need to do is right click and of course click the definition. Another way is simply to go in our only module here and just find it up here. And of course, if we scroll up here, you'll see it as a single line of code. That's all we need. Right? All I need to do is basically take whatever is in our staging area here and then bring it over into our main area. So since our fields are all, we don't necessarily need to clear it out because we only have one person. So I'm going to take all the way from J4 through AA and down all the way down to A37 and bring it directly inside here. Actually, I'm going to probably start with here. I want to bring it over in E6 all the way down through V. So we're actually going to start it over actually in our subheader row here, actually in J3. So we want to bring that over too because that includes the date. Okay, so that's all we need to do with one line of code. So cash flow, the sheet here, range E6 through V40 is simply equal to the transaction database, that's the sheet, J3 through AA37. Bring over the values and the formats. The formats are already set, right? The formats, all I did once just to copy those formats, all you need to do is just copy them one time because we have a single report, and so that'll be just fine. So all I need to do is just paste them in here, and then just paste everything in here. And then we don't worry about that. So circular reference warning because those are just formulas, and then that's all we have to do. Just rerun the code here, and there's no values for 2022, 2021, bringing those values. And notice it is only those values that are brought over, not the formulas, and that's what we want, only the values. So a single line of code is going to do that for us. Great, that's really cool. We've got some other macros that we want to show you, right? This is for the monthly detail, but what if I run the code and I want to show the previous period? I only want to show the single year. If I change the year, I want to make sure that we're only bringing over, notice it only brings over what we need. Actually, everything's being brought over, but we're actually hiding the columns, right? We're only showing the columns that are affected. And so how do we do that? Well, what we do is we have a macro that's tied to this. This is called previous period. And this is going to be basically a Boolean, and it's going to be based on B3 here, B3. So if I right click here, format the control, and I look at the cell link and I see that that's B3. That is the cell linked to that. So I know if B3 is true, we should show the previous period. That previous period is based on columns I and J. However, if we unselect it, we should hide columns I and J. So we just need to tie in a macro to this. If we assign the macro, we see that there's been a macro assigned called previous period. If we click on the edit, it's going to take us into that same module again here. This is the first one. We have previous period toggle. So this is the macro. This is the macro that we're going to be focusing on. So with the cash flow, right? What we want to do is I want to know, is B3 true or not? If B3 is true, then we are going to show those two columns. In that case, let's call this show previous period, show previous period. And otherwise, we are going to hide previous period. And it's very simple. All we need to do, hide previous period. Great. So if we're showing the previous period, all I need to do is unhide those columns. In other words, hidden equals false based on I and J, entire column hidden equals false. So basically we're unhiding it with that. However, if B3 is not true, meaning B3 is false, we're going to do this. We are going to hide the previous period. In that case, I and J, entire column hidden equals true. So this is the macro that's going to run every single time we click on this right here. And that's simple macro is just going to let us hide or unhide that. Very, very simple. Now, but I also want to show the monthly detail. If I've decided to show this specific year ending 2021, but I want to show all the detail for that month, I only want to show that. So what do I want to do then? In that case, I want to hide both the years 20 and 21. I want to hide those 4 columns, and I want to show the columns all the way from K through V. So those are the columns that we're going to show. So how do we do that? Well, that's very, very simple. So we can do that with a macro called cash flow monthly detail. It is that same macro that is also tied to this option here. And it is this option that is based on B4, right? So if we right click here and go into the format control, we can see that the cell link is B4, right? So as we change it, it goes from true to false and true to false. Okay, so again, we can run that macro and then determine based on what is in B4. And that's just what we're going to do inside the macro. So again, focused on the cash flow. This time we're going to say if range B4 equals true, then we want to show the monthly detail. In that case, we're going to hide the annual columns. Those 4 columns are located in G through J. The entire column hidden equals true. We're going to hide those 4 columns. We also need to show the other columns, show those 12 monthly columns. And that's in K through V. So K through V, entire column hidden equals false. We want to show those monthly columns. Great, but what I also want to do is I want to hide that previous period, right? I don't want the user to be able to click on the previous period because there's no previous period, right? I want to make sure to hide that option. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we do is we give this a name. We're going to call it previous period. And then the second thing we do inside VB is we want to hide that shape. So we can do that with just this single line of code right here. Shapes previous period dot visible equals MSO false. That is going to hide the previous period option, right? We don't want the user to select that. They only should select that when our annual option is shown. However, here's basically when we're showing the monthly detail, when it's true. But what if it's false? If it's false, we're going to hide the monthly detail. And that's just basically the opposite of what we did before. This case, in the entire column, G through J, those annual columns, hidden equals false, meaning we do want to show those annual columns. And the monthly columns are actually going to be hiding those. So K through V, those 12 columns, hidden equals true. We're going to hide those monthly columns. Also, what I want to do is I want to determine based on whatever's located in B3, have we shown the previous period or not? For example, what I'm saying is once I unclick this, I need to know, are we going to show the previous period or not? Now let's unselect it. So in this case, we're not showing the previous period. I've selected monthly detail here. Now what I want to do is I want to unselect it. The question is, are we going to show that second year or not, the previous year or not? And we're going to know it based on whatever's in B3. So if B3 is false, we are not going to show that previous year. However, if B3 is true, when we unselect this, we are going to show that previous year. So we're going to base that on B3. So that's just what we do inside here. We're going to base it on that idea. If B3 equals false, then range, the entire column hidden equals true. We're going to hide the previous period if it's unselected. So only if B3 is false, then we're going to hide that previous period. Otherwise, it's already displayed, right? It's already displayed here. We've displayed it here, the second column, but now I need to know whether we're going to hide it. We're going to hide it only if B3 is false. We're hiding that previous period if it's unselection. And then also the last thing that I want to do is shapes previous period visible equals true, meaning I want to show that option again, right? We want to make sure that that option becomes visible again after they unselect it. I want to make sure that this option group. Option is visible. To do that, we just make sure that we do that inside the VBA code, making it MSOC true, making that visible again. That's it. That's all we have to do to switch between the monthly detail. Very powerful. I also want to print this, right? Now I want to print it out, and I want to be able to print it out to whatever the default printer is. When I click here, I want to print it. My default printer is currently Snagit Editor, so it's going to print to my Snagit application. Now, if we take a look inside here, you see my Snagit application. It's right here, and it's going to show us that particular report here. But also, what I want to do, notice that it is a portrait, right? It's a portrait, right? Meaning vertical. However, what if I decide, let's just show that to you. I'll bring this down a little bit here. So what if I decide that I want to make it landscape, right? The monthly version, there we go, now we can see it. The monthly version is landscape, right? So if I'm on the monthly detail, notice this is more of a landscape, a horizontal form. So if I print that, I need to make sure that this one gets printed in landscape. So if we take a look inside the printer, notice that this one's landscape. It looks very nice, right? So there's a difference between the two reports. So we need to determine the type of report and then make it, whether it's make it portrait, like as in the annual, or make it landscape as in the monthly detail. So we can do that with just a few lines of code. So let's get into VBA and determine that. So first of all, if the cash flow before this equals false, then we know it's annual, right? And why is that? When we click on the monthly detail, we see monthly details true here. However, if it's unselected, it's false. So if B4 is false, we know to make sure to print that range inside our portrait. And all we need to do is manually, we can do this because we have a very fixed, a very specific, and in this report, it's always going to be this fixed range. It's not a dynamic range, meaning it's always going to start here on E5. It's always going to end on J40. So in that case, we can set the print range manually. All we need to do is go to page layout, print area here, and then just set the print area, and then it's automatically set. And notice it's going to cover the entire ones. But actually what we want to do is go into the monthly detail and make sure that it's already set for the entire range. If we decide to print for the entire range, it will, of course, not show those hidden columns. So we can make it for the entire range. So the page layout print area, and set that print area. So we're setting the entire print area. However, it's only going to show up what's there. So once we have that print area set manually, because we have a fixed range, we can then determine whether that page setup, that orientation is going to be portrait or landscape based on whatever's in B4. If the annual data is being shown, and then what we're going to do is we're going to set the cash flow, that's the sheet, page setup, orientation equals XL portrait. I also want to make sure that we're centering it horizontally, right? I don't want it to appear on the left or the right. I want to center it horizontally equals true. So that's going to center that, right? Making sure that there's enough space on both the left and the right side. Notice that it was centered inside our picture. Else, what if the monthly details? Then what I want to do is I want to set that page orientation to landscape. And that's what we do here, landscape. We don't need to set that horizontally because it takes up all of the page. It takes up more than enough. As you can see inside our page, it took up the entire page. So that's all we need to do, right? It took up everything here. See that? And yet in this one, there were spaces on the left and right. So we needed to make sure that we centered it. So we can do that within it. But however, the monthly took care of that automatically. Okay, so we take care of that. And the last thing is all we need to do is actually print it out. So we can do the code cashflow.printout. And then you're going to see, so as soon as you click the printout, you're going to see a bunch of options from, to, right? These are multiple pages. If we want to set the page numbers, we can do. If there's a number of copies, we can do. If we want to preview it first, we would put in true, but we don't. If we want the active printer, right, we can do that with the active printer. We do want to set to the active printer, of course. And we also want to make sure that we're printing to file. If we wanted to print it to a specific file, we could put in a file path here. If we wanted to collate, we could do that. If we wanted to print it to a specific file name, or a specific name that's printed, and do we want to ignore print areas? Certainly not. We don't want to ignore print areas. So we want to make sure that we use those print areas that we've just set. That is it. That is the only code that's going to print it out to the default printer. If you want to print it out to a different printer or a dynamic printer, you can put that in here as well. All right. So the last thing is I want to be able to email this very, very easily with just a little bit of code. code, and allows us to do it. So when we click the email button here, it's going to automatically create a PDF, and then inside that PDF, it's going to automatically create that email. So this time what I want to do is I want to create that PDF. Let's bring that down so we can see the PDF. And here it is. Here's the PDF that got created inside that email. We can put any to from if we want, so no problem on that. So that's how we email that. So let's take a look inside the code, go over the details. That relatively simple. The first thing is we're going to dimension the Outlook app as an object and the Outlook mail as an object. We're going to use late binding here. It means we're not tying this to any specific email object. We are going to use Outlook as our default, and we're going to tie that in a little bit later on. We also want the file path as a string, right? I want to set that file path. That's very important because we're going to be creating a PDF, and then we need to attach that PDF inside our email. So what I need to do is actually create that PDF, put it on some space on our computer, and then extract it from that location and put it inside the email. So to do that, we need that as a string. We're going to create that file path. We need to know wherever. We'll just use the current workbook path because that's a known path. Wherever that might be, wherever your workbook is, we're just going to put that PDF right there. We could probably delete it after as well. Then what we're going to do is we're going to put a backslash on it. And then I want to give it a specific name. Notice inside the email, we did have a specific name that got created. Let's take a look inside that because we didn't go over it. You see, if we email that report, clicking on the email here, we see it's called cashflow 2021 _. So I want that year to be based on that. So to do that, we must have that information in there. So all we need to do is extract that year directly from the cash flow E3 value. That's going to get us. And then also we want to make sure that we're putting the PDF on the end of that. The PDF, that's very important, right? Because that's the file type that we need to put on that extension. Great. Now what I want to do, again, I want to do exactly the same thing we did on the cash flow print. I want to make sure that we're going to determine whether it is portrait or landscape. That orientation is going to be based on the type there. Is it an annual report? If that's false, then we're going to make it portrait, right? The annual data. If B4 equals false, it is annual data, right? B4 would be, if it's true, then we're going to be monthly. So if that's false, I want to make it portrait. And I also want to center it horizontally, just like we did above. Otherwise, if it's a monthly detail, we're going to make sure it's landscape. Once we have all that, then we want to create that PDF. We can actually create that PDF with one line of code. Based on that sheet, cash flow, export as a fixed format. And what is that format? We're going to export it as a Excel type PDF. Where do we want that located? We want it located in our file path, right? There's some other options that we have. What other options might we want? Well, we have, let's take a look, put a comma in here, and we can see that if we want a specific quality, we can. If we want to include the document properties, we can. We also want to know, are we going to be ignoring the print areas? That's false. We do want to make sure we maintain those print areas. If there's a specific page from or to, we can do that. Are we going to open that PDF after publish? False. If we wanted to open it, we just change that to true. And then we have a fixed format if we want that, but that's fine. Great. So once we've created that PDF, we're ready to create our email. What we want to do is we want to set the Outlook application. Here's where that late binding comes in. We're setting that out, that object, Outlook application. We're going to create an object, and that object is going to be called Outlook application. That is the application, our Outlook application. This creates the application or launches it in case. Then what we want to do is we want to create an email. Creating a brand new email is all we need to do is set the Outlook mail equal to the Outlook app, create item, and then 0. We're creating that email. Then once we've created that email, we can just add some information. With the Outlook email, we're not setting the to email to address. We could do BCC, CC if we wanted to, subject or message, but all we're going to be doing is simply adding an attachment. So attachments dot add and the file path. It's adds PDF as attachment. And then all we want to do is display that email. If you want to send it right away, use .send. So we go to use .send to send right away without displaying. Okay? But for our purpose of the training, we're going to be doing that. That is it. That's all we have to do. Super simple training, right? Really cool. So we can print the report, we can email it, we can change the year, And this is how we create an amazing cash flow statement. I do appreciate this. Quick training, thank you so much for your support. We do have a Patreon. I'll be adding more to this. If you have any ideas you want me to add onto this, let me know on Patreon. Every single week, I create an updated training of the current week and based on your ideas. So your features that you've requested, or if you need something fixed, or maybe you want me to focus on an area. That's all on our Patreon, along with a ton more features. So I hope you'll join us there on Patreon. We'll see you there. And thanks so much. We'll see you next week.